Welcome, everyone, to Dead Talk Live. And tonight it is my special honor to welcome our guest, Leroy Kincaide, whose movie, The Last Rite, is being released in 1 week from today. I had to tell Leroy before we started how much I just absolutely love this film. So, Leroy, thank you for being our guest. How are you doing tonight?
Awesome, buddy. Thank you very much for having me on. A little late over here. We're getting close to the witching hour in another 30 minutes or so. So bloody awesome, mate. I'm loving it.
Yeah. It's the best time to do a show, especially a horror show. Now, before we get to The Last Rite, which we have a ton to talk about, you have a story that I find inspiring and takes a lot of guts, all right? You were on the precipice you were right there to a hugely successful wrestling career when you basically just dropped it to pursue your dream of making films. That really impresses me. That takes guts. I want to hear your story coming straight from you and what led you to making this decision.
Yeah, so for a number of years, some people that may know or may not know, I was a professional wrestler in the UK for probably best part of around, I say 10 to 15 years, there or thereabouts. And I probably had a good professional run for about 10 years. So I spent a lot of time training and stuff, started at the age of 15, I guess, and finally walked away around the age of 30. Maybe 29-ish, that sort of age. Yeah, it was awesome. What can I say? Loved the sport, loved every aspect of wanting to go out there and entertain a massive crowd. So worked from like little independent shows from, I guess, the size of like, I think my first show was around 12 to 20 people max, wasn't a lot.
Okay.
And then had a massive show where I had a huge opportunity with the WWE. I had a tryout and a wrestling match with a guy called Vladimir Kozlov in front of like 18 to 20,000 people. So the paradox between one having not many and one having a lot was huge. So I had a fantastic run. But, long story short, I just fell out of love with, I guess you could say, the industry and the sport.
Now, was filmmaking your true passion from a very young age, or films in general?
No. I wish I could give you the old Spielberg answer and say, when I was a kid, I had my 8mm or 16mm. None of that. I come from a very modest background. I wasn't really brought up around the love and art of filmmaking. So I just naturally had a love for horror, though, weirdly. My first memory of ever watching a horror film was probably around the age of 5 or 6, where I watched The Thing. So there's the element where the guy is on the bench, he's about to have the shock on his chest, and his head falls off, and it turns into a spider legs thing, like very gruesome
awesome
thing
movie.
To see at the age.
Classic.
Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. So I see that at a very young age, and I guess you could say some of that influenced, I guess, some of my style, because I was never really told, oh, don't watch that, that's for adults. I was pretty much allowed to watch whatever I want, which was bloody awesome.
Same here.
I got to see all the horror films.
Yeah, I totally understand. Me too. For me, my brother, who's 9 years older, was my influence in horror. And I, like you, watched my first horror film at 5. My first horror film was the original Halloween. So I'm right there with you. I totally understand.
Yeah, and that's an absolute classic as well. I think the thing for me, I got a bit of I should say, an old love story with horror films. I love films that sort of end up from the late 70s into the 80s, some of the 90s stuff, but there was just a golden era in, I think, cinema between the 80s. I don't know what it was. If you look at all aspects of cinema, comedy, action, even some dramas, had elements of it there. There was just some magic in a lot of films, and definitely in horror. Like, you know, 80s was huge for a lot of films that inspire me definitely to this day to want to create stories in a horror sort of universe, you know?
So it was horror itself and just not, you know, overall movies or filmmaking that drew you into making your own horror movies.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, you started out, according to IMDb, you did several shorts. Now, The Last Rite is your first full feature-length film. So, doing all those shorts, do you feel like it gave you the proper experience to do The Last Rite?
I'd want to say yeah, but no. Making a feature film is a huge undertaking of work that, you know, not a lot of people tend to talk about, not necessarily knowing what to do. It's like, can you keep up the persistent attitude to keep on going over 1 year, 2 years, 3 years that we started The Last Rite? So I started penning down the idea in 2018. Moving through to now, it's like now the film is just about to come out. You know, it's a lot of an attitude more than it is just having a skill set. You know, skill set helps, but you know, it's a combination of things. So a short film, you know, you can go on and do in like 2 or 3 days, get to the edit. You can edit it in, you know, a moderate amount of a couple of weeks, you know, whereas this is entirely different. You know, because I had to do even like, for example, where it's so independent, you know, a lot of everything was in-house. So I had to do a lot of the editing I did, you know, cinematography I did, the writing I did, directing I did, you know, the usual story for most people starting out. But it was 2 weeks alone, just data wrangling, putting all of the files into order.
Oh, yeah.
Like it took an extraordinary amount of time.
Yeah, I'm an editor. I'm an editor myself, so I know like a 1 minute clip can take 2 days to put together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, let's talk about, because you wrote, produced, directed, edited this film. I mean, this is your baby. Let's talk about the writing for a little bit. Watching this film, I see a little bit of you paying tribute to some past horror movies, which I think is great. When you were writing this film, and it's basically a possession story, what was your inspiration to say, okay, this is what I want to write, and this is how I want to do it? What was your initial inspiration for The Last Rite?
So, you know, paying homage was very, very important from the get-go, because the films that have inspired me, definitely, there's two massive ones that inspired me to want to do this film. One is The Exorcism of Emily Rose, and the other one is Amityville 2, The Possession.
That is such an overlooked movie. I really like The Possession, the second one. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say that.
No.
I think it's overlooked.
Absolutely. It slips by a lot of people. I don't know necessarily why. I know Hollywood had it in 2005. I think they released the one with, what's his name? I've got the guy's name now. Terrible with names, by the way. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Yeah, but they released, the one around 2005, which was really cool. But it sort of felt like it was lacking a little bit of the authenticity of what I felt was a very, very, one, as you say, overlooked story. But two, it also, where it was inspired by true events / story-esque stuff, I felt that there was a little bit of the realism that got, lost a little bit in that. So for me, I'm someone who I draw a lot of inspiration from the things I love. Amityville 2 was a very big part of the process, because one, I wanted to sort of get across a vibe of, the priest that's in number 2.
Yeah.
I really wanted to like have a priest that somewhat felt in that sort of space, so that character alone was a huge inspiration for the story, because I think it's not necessarily about having the right answers sometimes in these types of horror stories, which is more exciting and entertaining than, you instantly know what to do straight away.
Yep.
I feel like that is another area where I wanted to really sort of put a little bit of a mark on it, based around some true events scenarios as well. I found that, like, having had some experience with sleep paralysis myself and things that I had been affected by, really helped sort of stay true to the ethos of the story and how I wanted to create that.
That's awesome. Now, did you have any help with the script when you were writing it, or was it just all you?
No, it's all myself. I throw myself with my OCD. I throw myself.
That's another thing we have in common.
Oh, mate, I cannot tell you how obsessive I am about stuff. It's to the point of where I don't really sleep. Like, I have a company called Nocturnal Pictures. It's not a coincidence. Like, 3 a.m. now. Well, we're nearly 3 a.m., 2:45 in the morning. Yeah, it's like, this is my golden hour. I can still work for another 3-4 hours.
That's me. My bedtime's at 5 in the morning.
Right. I mean, some people might find it odd, but like, I just don't know. There's just something about the creative energy at night that I literally just absolutely love. I don't know if it's because the world becomes more silent and there's a lot more just energy around that just isn't around and is taken up in the day.
I agree. For me, the nighttime, when I step outside at 2-3 o'clock in the morning and everybody's asleep, I don't know. It's just like you see the world differently while everyone else is sleeping. And I totally, and people who are not night owls, they don't really understand what you're describing. I totally understand it because I'm the same way, but it's hard to put it into words. You actually have to live it and not force yourself to stay awake. That's not going to work. But if you just are up at that time of night, it's just a world. You view it from a completely different set of eyes.
Yeah. I mean, I like to describe the night as like walking in to a void of space. Now, if you walk into like a normal day, like obviously everyone walks into a normal day, you come out of the house, you walk out, you hear cars, you hear birds, you hear, maybe a dog barking, like the normal stuff. Now, at a certain point at night, things very, 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 very much quieten down. And something quite tranquil about that as an experience. I draw a lot on things that stimulate me in a very different way, because I think the void of things is sometimes, if you look a little deeper, you can sort of see beauty in that. Yeah. So if you reflect back to like when we had the massive lockdowns of 2020, if you went out in the day, if you were allowed to go outside and walk, it was like deathly silent. But there was something quite beautiful about just hearing birds that you don't normally hear, and seeing wildlife you wouldn't normally see. So I find that for me, that utilizing that space and that time where not a lot of people are around, just, I don't know, I find it invigorating and enriches my soul, I guess.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned that it was years. So how long exactly was it from the time you started writing the script till you were done with post-production?
So I began writing and penning down the idea, I'd say around August 2018.
Okay.
So I had a loose idea, let's say. And then we went from then all the way to, well, I guess you could say early this year. January, February time was at the point where we'd had an edit in 2020. We had some feedback on that. I understood what the vibe was, that I'd spent a tiny bit too much time on certain areas of the story. So I went back to killing the baby a bit more, took out a further 15 minutes of the movie, and we ended up with what we've got now. So I'd say from August 2018 through to January, February 2021.
And so so you actually shot this during the COVID lockdown period. Is that accurate?
No, just before.
Oh,
so
lucky.
Yeah. Just before. So we caught it we shot in 2019, September. We've done a tiny bit of filming in October, but it was wrapped in and around that time frame. We had 14 locations and shot over a period of about 6 weeks, maybe a tiny bit more, but we had a solid block of a month, and then we had a few days either side of that month where we were able to shoot everything.
So let me ask you: did you cut this film entirely by yourself, or did you have help?
No, everything that is on the film was done entirely by myself. Apart from there was a little bit of mixing that was done and sound design. There was areas of sound design that I had a hand in as well. And the score was done by someone else, but color grading, there was 1 or 2 VFX plates that was done by someone else.
Okay, because I was about to say there's some pretty nice VFX scenes in there, and I was curious if you did that yourself or if you brought in another company for the VFX.
Yeah, so there's a couple of moments there where there's a VFX one. There's one main one. Where the nan's in the spot there. There's one main one there, and there was another one in the woodlands, which was just actually replacement of things. Outside of that, most things were done practically. If there was anything else that was in there, there wasn't really a lot of VFX. A lot of the VFX that we had to do was on areas you wouldn't necessarily think that there was, So there's, for example, there's the main scene of the film. And because of the way that I had to light it, I had to try and light it in a way which really got across the story. But at the same time, there was a silver bed frame. And that silver bed frame reflects light. And I could see the light on the bed frame. So I was like, oh, no, I've got to rotoscope it all out. And it took me about 2 weeks of rotoscoping all of the entire scene, the main scene. I don't want to say too much. But the main scene, what the film is about, where she's on the bed there, if you look at that whole entire scene, virtually every aspect of that entire bit, I had to literally frame by frame go in manually and cut out the light.
And that is, for people who don't know, extremely time consuming.
Yes. And I did try it with the After Effects tool.
Yes.
The After Effects tool doesn't work very effectively on everything.
No.
Fine details, you're lost.
Exactly.
Game over.
Exactly. And the way I like to describe The Last Rite, it is the perfect example that you can make an absolutely amazing film on a moderate budget as long as you have a good story, a good director, and you put the right people in front of the camera. And when I say the right people, I'm not talking about big A-lister or Hollywood names. I mean, people that can bring to life your vision for the story. And that's exactly what you did here. So that's how I classify The Last Rite. And I've had numerous discussions with a lot of filmmakers. And, we both say it back and forth. A good movie is not determined by the budget. Okay? Because how many times have we seen these big Hollywood like 9 figure plus, sorry, 10, 11 figure movies that are just a big bomb, you know? A good story, acting is what's essential. So let's go to the acting. When you cast the parts for Lucy, Ben, and Father Roberts, was that a difficult process? Did you go through a lot of people before settling on those three?
Now, weirdly, there was a little bit of a process, but it wasn't massive. Like one of the other roles was so much more difficult to cast. You wouldn't believe it. Like the character Ellie,
Mm-hmm.
in there, which is like for the audience that doesn't know, is like Lucy's close
Friend,
friend.
yeah, yeah, friend.
In the story, that was one of the most difficult roles to cast. There was nobody around that I felt matched the energy that Ellie had as a character. I called her Bubbles of the story,
Mm-hmm.
because there was like just it was just a more of a lighter vibe with her than there was some of the other characters. But finding someone that could do the nuances of that character without blowing it completely in a direction where it was not going the right way or just people wasn't the right fit, that character was quite difficult to cast.
That's surprising.
Lucy,
Yeah.
yeah, it surprised us because she wasn't really involved as heavily as all the other characters.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought, a number of days, it wasn't like like Lucy and Ben and definitely Father Roberts. Those characters were on a lot of the days. Whereas, Ellie had a few days, but just trying to get someone to really like match that was difficult. She was the last person we ended up casting
Wow.
as a character.
So I want to talk about Ben's character for a little bit. Of course, we're not going to give away any spoilers here, but Ben is a character that you don't root for if you're watching this film as as an audience member. What was your thinking, your inspiration, whatever you want to call it, for making Ben's character the way that you made him in the movie?
So for Ben, what was very important was to highlight sometimes us as men, our issues that we have when addressing a relationship. The problem is we're too headstrong at times. It's good. It serves a very good purpose. Definitely in business, it's sometimes you've got to be ruthless.
Mm-hmm.
There's never easy time to make a tough decision, but also sometimes we can be our own worst enemies.
Absolutely.
We need sometimes a feminine touch to help ground us a bit and give us a little bit of light. It's not just about brawn and being strong. It's sometimes about knowing how to accept the embrace. So for me, that character was where he come from. He's a very busy guy in his life. He has a goal. He wants to achieve good things. Likes things in life. It's like he's just a well-to-do guy that's not overly flamboyant.
Yeah, and
but
if you can't see it, it's not there. It doesn't exist. Type of character.
Yeah. Black's black, white's white.
Yeah.
Simple as that. He's got his day. He likes his day. Don't rock his day. That's pretty much where he is. There were some elements of the character, unfortunately, we had to strip back out of the telling of the story. Just for time, I sort of hated it, but at the same time, I understood where these gaps were that needed to be shown. Does it help the story? No, not really. Let me cut it out. Why is it in there? It's character development, sweet, but sometimes it's like as a writer and director, it's the things that I have to make sure I maintain when I work on things is not ride my ego into the story, as opposed to tell the story for the character, not my ego.
Gotcha.
So I absolutely I'm not avert to cutting. I sort of weirdly love cutting stuff out more than I like keeping it in.
Were you happy when you saw the final cut of the film the way that Ben came across to the will come across to the audience?
Um, I would say there's just little moments that made the side of his nature a little bit harder than I wanted, if I'll be honest. I'll be honest about that. But the sacrifice was that if I try to get across a balanced aspect of it, one of the issues with that was I couldn't just add a moment, because the moment needed the next moment that made sense to the previous moment, which meant rather than it being like, you know, the running time that it is, I would have had to add probably about an additional 7+ minutes back into the film. And sometimes those things can hurt the movie more than keep the movie strong, you know, because you're trying to highlight an area of a character rather than keeping your audience engaged to the point of where it's at a point where you don't lose the audience. But I feel if it was any longer in some of those areas, we just don't need to be listening to everything. So let's move the story forward. So I made this decision to do that.
Now, the actor who plays Ben, Johnny Fleming, when you casted him and you read the script, did you have to work with him? Did he have questions as to why Ben is the way he is that you had to explain to him?
Yeah. So he was like, you know, he's like, oh, he's very, very tough. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, this is his nature, though. I'm like, there's a reason why the slug line reads Ben's house and not house.
Yeah.
There's a reason why things start with Ben, you know, on the landing and stuff like that. It's like all of these paintings that are in the house that were originally created by a local artist, by the way. I like that. Which is really awesome. Like, we had a local artist, sorry to segue, and he was like so eager to get on the project. He literally painted all these original paintings, about like 20 different paintings for the house to create the look. So it made it even a little bit more authentic that the paintings that were on the wall were actually real authentic paintings. So I sort of said to Johnny, I was like, well, you've got to think of this character as he's a guy who knows what he wants and he gets what he wants. So people that tend to be like that tend to just be like that. Like there's no champagne and parties unless it's on their terms, how they want it, when they want it, you know?
Yes.
So for me, it was very important for the dynamic of their relationship that in his brute mentality and strength, that Lucy actually, even though vulnerable, she also added a vibe of strength to him and in a way that he didn't realize. And at the point when he realized it, it's too late.
It is, yeah.
You know? So it's almost like it served in a really weird aspect way to keep him the harder nail than necessarily making him have all of this dynamic of personality that the vibe of it that I had before.
Absolutely. Okay.
So, like, in a way, for me, with Ben, I feel absolutely like thankful that we got Johnny, because I feel like he was the right fit for the role. He absolutely, you know, done an excellent job on bringing the vibe of the character that I saw to life.
Yeah. I mean, you know, when you're watching a character and they're meant not to be likable and you just walk away, just aggravated with them. The actor did a fantastic job at playing the role. And that's exactly what Johnny brought to The Last Rite. Now let's talk about Lucy, the lead actress in this film. It's all about Lucy, a more multi-dimensional, complicated character than Ben. She has a lot of layers that we discover as the film progresses. When you were creating the character of Lucy, what was your thought process as to how you were going to unveil her and her background as the film went along?
So for me with Lucy, the biggest thing that I had to focus on before I started adding too much dialogue and other bits and pieces to the story was that this character has to come from a place of sheer vulnerability by circumstance. So she can't help the way she is because of the way she was brought up. So there's areas of the subtext there that had to make its way from the start point through to the end point, and they cause her to make certain decisions, to make certain actions, to decide to not to decide in certain circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that was really important for her as a character before I even really got writing terribly too much. What I found as I started creating her, and there was more layers and layers and layers, it's like what I found was her weakness was ultimately her ability to just not say actually what she felt.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it kept her more of a prisoner. But for me, I try to use as much real life experience as possible, because I think that a lot of the time as people, what we do is we hope people pick up signals of what we really mean versus what we actually say.
Yeah.
Because we're in fear of upsetting people,
Rejection.
not making people, making people feel comfortable and stuff like that. And sometimes what we should say is just say, right, I'm not fucking happy about this, blah, 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 and it's done.
Exactly.
Where part of this was really, for me, was like one of her core wounds that kept her in a state of things. So when she does get the courage to take action, it's like the action taken. When you go back through the story, if you have another watch of it, usually anytime she goes to do something, things either get better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
But it does one of the two every time. So I don't want to give it away because just in case the audience.
I know. Yeah. It's kind of tricky to walk this landmine of something that has not been released yet, but to give information to entice the viewers to watch it, but also not give any stuff away. Lucy is just a very multi-layered, and through acts 1 and 2 of the film, you just want to shake Lucy and say, stand up for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be treated this way. Stand up. Is that what you were shooting for?
Yeah, the whole way through that, yeah. Because I think, again, coming back to the male and female thing, like between men and women, we have a wonderful synergy in how we can work together. If one's too headstrong for the other and very domineering as a personality, you tend to find a victim scenario starts to happen.
Absolutely.
So what I wanted to really do with the truth of this story, I made a very, very, very important conscious decision when I wrote this film. It will be the only one I'll write in this sort of vein, with this sort of vibe, because I had to get this longer narrative out. That was, I didn't want to write a film absolutely littered with jump scares in this space. So for me, it was really important that the story was the thing that I was serving and not a mechanism to just
scare people,
to just do stuff. Yeah. As a horror fan, one of the worst things that I find is when I know the film's predictability by, and jump and jump and jump.
Gotcha.
It's like if you look back to the films I was talking about earlier on, like The Thing, I go to Aliens even, these are films that have a legacy to this day. People still watch them and are in awe.
Yeah.
They weren't littered with jump scares.
No.
You cared about the characters. The characters had a mind of their own. They weren't there to just serve a plot point of the story. They were involved with the story, and for me, it's so important, and that is what really ultimately happens and happened in The Last Rite.
Exactly.
So So for me, keeping Lucy engaged is like part of her growth. Is at the point in time when she starts to go for something, she starts to try and step out of her zone. You know, it's like, do things get better or worse when she does it? You know, and it's like, it's quite difficult to not to filter everything. I'm trying to not give much away, but for me, it was just very important keeping her as somebody that gradually grew through the story, even though if you think of a world of things, you know, sometimes the bad guys win.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So
now,
so go on.
Yeah, I totally understand. And I think you did it brilliantly. And Bethan, that is how you pronounce her name, right? She did a wonderful job portraying Lucy. Now, let's talk. This is a paranormal movie, supernatural, whatever you want to call it, ghost film. I like the term paranormal. Now, when it came to creating the entity, not when you were putting it on paper, I'm talking about the visual representation that you were going to show us on screen. It's very tricky because we have thousands of paranormal movies out there where we see the entities displayed in all sorts of different ways and manners. What was your driving force to present them? I'm not going to give it away the way you did.
I would say for some, real life. How is that? Like, as someone who had an affliction of some sort years ago, you know, you see a shadow in the room. That's it. You know, it's not like a fancy spook flying through a window and going, ooh. It's literally like a shadow with presence that resonates with the feeling, and you see it. And it's like, you acknowledge the fact you've seen it, it's seen you. What do you do? Like, freeze. You know, you have to channel the emotions, and you don't know where it's going to go and whatever, and then boom.
Yeah.
For me, it was very much like that. I wanted to keep the real life stuff real life. You know, if you look at psychotic breaks and psychotic behaviors of people who would maybe be afflicted by a demon and think they're possessed, you know, there's a scientific theory that it's just a mental disorder.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it could be the case, but then there are probably going to be a few cases out there out of hundreds that may be a little bit more to it than just someone having a mental breakdown.
Absolutely.
So for that person, it's very real in their world. So that I really wanted to highlight in the story. For the shadow figures and entity, let's say, like, that was really important, that wasn't CG. That was all what you see is what you see. And I was trying to not, you know, we didn't have the budget to, like, be fancy. We didn't have the budget to.
But like you said, the way you did it, it was much more realistic. I mean, we've seen movies where demonic entities are displayed with horns and goat's feet, hooves, and long fingernails. But the way that you presented it to us in The Last Rite is more authentic, more real, where it is just a shadow. And a shadow can be anything. You don't know what that shadow is, what it represents, what its motivations are. And I love the fact that the entity in this film is, I don't want to give anything away, but is attached to a person rather than a place. What do you, I mean, what do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, you know, this is such a beautiful subject.
I know, it's kind of tricky to talk about it.
It's great. So, like, probably some people go, "As he knows quite so much about this sort of stuff." Well, years ago, I used to do paranormal investigation. Years ago, about 2010, I was heavily into paranormal investigation, weirdly. Used to go to locations, look for all sorts of stuff, and I used to talk to people about demonic affliction and affection on people. And weirdly, you find sometimes you get spiritual attachment which is more to do with the individual than it is to do with a house or a land or whatever. So some people naturally through their life, I would be one, are more empaths, so they can channel energy. Some have maybe clairvoyance, some can see things, but others have the ability to feel more, and not feeling from an emotional state, but connecting to people with on a feeling-based energy. Yeah. So those types of people are very much think of them like a bright light in a very dark tunnel. Now, when energy connects itself, be it demonic energy, be it any energy of any sort, and, you know, there's some light and dark people in this earth. Like, you know, some people are very negative, but not negative in like, oh, I've had a bad day. Yeah. The energy is just dark negative. And then you've got other people that are just like sunshine and rainbows. Now, the energy that's attached to some of those people could be just psychotic, or if it's more than that, I find sometimes anytime I've done the research, it's usually the attachment of things can leap from people to people. And, you know, when you've been around what they call energy vampires and you're sucked like dry and you're like, oh my God, you know, you feel knackered, your energy's low, you don't have any ability to sort of be able to process too much, you just want to go home and sleep. Yeah. There's a reason for that, you know, because you've been around an environment or an energy that's ultimately taken away some of your light, you know. So if it works like that with just being around people, you know, if there's, you know, dark energy there that's trying to attach itself to people, it's very much gonna happen. Absolutely. So what I did with the story is look at it from a way that's based in real life, or accounts of real life affliction and depression on people, because it's a story I hold quite close to my heart because I've had some experiences myself. So
and I you know, if you're willing to share, it sounds like your days of being a paranormal investigator and some of your personal experiences, you really use that, and finding this out for me for the first time makes a lot of sense as to what made this film seem really authentic, real, and so damn good. Because this is not somebody who's just using their creative imagination, no matter how good they are, you know, writing, creativity, and whatnot. You have personal experience. How much did that really help you to putting this script and this film together?
Well, it was really like the antithesis of how it was birthed. Because if I say how the story came to me, right? So I weirdly don't write like probably normal people should. So what I do is I find that there's a part of my creative mind, be that at night or any time, where I find that I just switch on and I channel, I guess you could say, energy, right? It could be an idea, it could be anything. Now, weirdly, I had an image in my head before I started writing this film. I had an image in my head of a man stood on a landing by a door in a fedora hat, which is just literally a silhouette. I'd have to try and dig out I've got an old picture. I've still got it somewhere. I have to try and find it and send it to you. But I had this image in my head for a while, so strong that I had to draw it. And I didn't know why I had it, but it was there. So I left it for like 2 weeks. And it was just in my head, like I kept seeing this guy, you know, his photo frames around in the wall. I knew there was things on the wall that were very relevant to whatever this was. And then all of a sudden I was like, that's what it is. I should tell this story in a way which involves areas of the truth of my experience with sleep paralysis and night terrors, and place that in a world with some of the research I've done, where it's like a created story that takes place fully inspired by real life stuff. Yeah. Like my story included. So by doing that, what I wanted to do was the atmosphere was probably the most important aspect of the telling of this story to exist, because it was about, when you wake up having had a sleep paralysis episode, it's not like you just wake up and all of a sudden it's all cool.
No.
Because there's a feeling usually associated with that. It can be severe fear, absolute dread. You don't always see something in the room either. But there are odd occasions when something is there, where it feels like something is there. So what I did was I wanted to use what I remember from my experiences and place that into the story. So, I could talk about this. So there's a moment where things are happening and there's just a shot of, there's like the bust. Do you know the little bust figurine?
Yeah.
Well, things become distorted when you're in this state.
Yeah.
Weirdly, like things feel a lot more menacing. So the atmosphere is already tense. So what I do is I try to use the space, the void of space, the aloneness, vulnerability in that time. Even though it's only short in the film, I use it to the best of my ability from my experience to just put as much as I can into the film.
Wow.
To keep it authentic.
That's amazing.
So that's what
That's amazing. I got to ask you for your opinion on something. Now, sleep paralysis is a medically recognized disorder, for lack of a better term. Now, a lot of people, almost every sleep paralysis story that people tell, they tell it like what you just described. There's something there with them, something really negative. Do you believe the medical explanation, your mind is awake but your body's asleep, which is sort of the medical definition of sleep paralysis? Or do you believe there's more of a paranormal element to it that's just not describable?
Yeah, it's probably a combination of both. I would say scientifically that for me, science is always proving and disproving itself. Like there's a science study that proves that apparently consciousness exists outside of the brain. So people with like flatline brain dead, on the anagram or whatever it is, where they look for brainwaves, basically like, people have come back from the dead and had a correlation of recognition of all sorts of stuff that they shouldn't have had.
Out of body experiences, yeah.
Yeah, because there was zero activity in the brain. So it's like, well, if that can be said for that, then when people wake up in this heightened state, when you look at like people that take DMT and do the ayahuasca trips, what are they unlocking potentially that we may not be able to see because of conditioning and programming of the mind? So when we look at like a sleep paralysis episode, there's a few things you've got to sort of look at. Like, firstly, is not to just jump to the first conclusion that, oh my God, there's something in the room and it's going to attack me.
Yeah.
But then it's really about, I would say, the end of how the result comes from that. So is it something that happens once, or is it something that continues to happen? If it continues to happen, what are the conditions that it happens under? Is it like in a new place? Is it, so for example, if every time you stayed around somebody's house that's unfamiliar territory to you and you had it, it could be very possible that it could be an anxiety or a fear of staying in a new space. It could be.
Yeah.
But if it's not the case and it's just random, there has to come a point where we've got to not try and look at things purely on a scientific base. Because if you look at like, describe what love is, like people can't describe love. People go above and beyond for love.
Yeah. It's
a feeling, right?
Yeah.
But we can't really quantify it, even though people do mad stuff for it, like think of it like this. I made a film for 3 years in the last Rite, didn't get paid a single penny for 3 years. I actually spent my money and my producer's money to make this happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, but I love it. But some people would go, I couldn't think of anything bloody worse.
Yeah.
So if we look at like the human condition of love and the emotional states of who we are and how we are, when any time someone has an episode of sleep paralysis, I think you just have to analyze it and not look at it like it is definitely something, but also at the same time, don't just rule it out like it's not something, because everybody's experience, some are similar and then some are very different.
Absolutely. Don't write it off as, oh, sleep, okay,
Yeah.
that's it, you're done, you're just this, forget about it. Or, you know, try to get it out of your mind. That's discounting whoever it is, you know? Because like you said, it could be 1 out of 200 or 300, where if you actually sit as a medical professional and listen to their story and really listen to what they're saying, you might see that there's something that is just not quite right there.
Yeah. I mean, you know, like with my particular story, it's somewhat different to most. Like when I knew that I was having this episode, I actually had gone for a good part of my life without knowing I'd had it. So It wasn't like, oh, I remember having this all the time, blah, 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 blah. It was actually a suppressed memory for me.
Wow.
It was deeply suppressed. And I went from, you know, so this happened a lot as a child. So there was things that, you know, I guess I was doing as a child that was just different, you know, like Cole in The Sixth Sense, mm-hmm. where he had like a little church where he used to go in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I used to never like to be able to see. Like I used to like my eyes covered. So for a long time, I'd have things covering my face, things covering my head, because I just didn't like to see.
Yeah.
Now, it's just a quirk as a child, whatever. Yeah. I grew up, went to teenage years and all of that. And I was watching a documentary called The Entity, not the film The Entity, mm-hmm. but a documentary based on accounts of people who had sleep paralysis, night terrors. So I'm watching this documentary. So I'm the age of like 19 at this point. So, you know, gone through secondary school, gone through my life and just, you know, doing bits, whatever. And something hit me when I was watching this documentary, right? So like walking into a candy store or an old bakery or something, and you buy an old donut, or you buy something specific that you would have had as a child and you eat it. The smell unlocks a memory that you remember. All of a sudden you're with your grandparents, you're around a table, you're here, you're there in your mind, because you're like, damn, I remember that.
Yeah.
And I haven't had this for so long, I can remember everything about it.
Yeah.
Well, this happened when I watched this documentary, right? So I had all of these suppressed memories, you know, which are, I guess, a protection mechanism from going through whatever I was going through, which unlocked all sorts of stuff. The sleep paralysis was part of it, but there were other things as well that I'd blocked out over the years. And, you know, for want of a better word, it was quite horrific to relive it mentally and feel like I'd had a part of my life actually installed in my head that I didn't know I had.
Wow.
Like that was quite a trip.
I can imagine.
And you know, I'm someone, I don't drink, never done drugs, never done none of that. And at that point in my life, I was really like shook by it, because I didn't know how to articulate all of these new memories that I had. Wow. Like it was like a brain dump of experience.
And it all just got unlocked at once.
All at once.
Wow.
Wow,
that is a fascinating story. Wow, I can't. We're out of time. Moving. I want to ask you one more question. I feel like we could go on talking for hours. Moving forward in your filmmaking career, because you have so much experience in the paranormal field, I assume you want to pursue and continue making horror movies in the paranormal subgenre. Is that accurate?
Uh, would I make more in the subgenre? Yeah, I'd make more for sure. It's not my next projects that I've wrote. So I've got two other feature scripts that I've wrote. One was wrote before the last Rite, and one I've not long finished. One's like Aliens meets 28 Days Later. Okay. It's in that sort of space. The other one is Strangers meets I Spit on Your Grave. It's in that sort of space.
Nice.
No longer paranormal, but I love this subject. So
me too.
For me, I would definitely do another paranormal film, one that I feel I could serve for sure.
But at your core, you're a hardcore horror fan, and that's what motivates you. That's what fires you up, and that's a passion, and that's a beautiful passion, because as we all know, horror fans are very loyal. They're the best fans in the world. I have no doubt in my mind that the last Rite is going to be a huge success. And to take it even a step further, I would definitely put it in the top 5 or 10 of the best horror movies of 2021.
Oh man, thank you very much.
I'm not just saying that. If you watch I don't say that, and I'm saying that the last Rite, and for me, I would definitely put it either in the top 5 or top 10. And you did a brilliant job. Guys, the movie's coming out a week from today. Please, Leroy, let our audience know where they can watch it 1 week from today.
So as far as I'm aware, 1 week from today, it's going to be on most of the main video on demand platforms out in the States. You guys have some different things there that we don't have necessarily here in the UK. So our UK fans are not going to be able to see it, but you guys out there will be able to watch it. I believe it's on iTunes.
So it'll be like on Amazon, Vudu, iTunes, all of them.
Yeah.
People can rent, buy it. I recommend it, guys. You are not going to be disappointed. This movie is great. It has a great blend of some of the normal stuff that we've seen in paranormal tropes, but it blended in nicely with some stuff you've never seen before, all put together with a great story. Leroy, you did a fantastic job on your first feature film. I wish you all the success. I think this film is going to be hugely successful. And in today's world, as we know, it's all by word of mouth, really. You got your marketing, you got your advertising, but ultimately, it's one horror fan talking to their friend horror fan, and the word will spread. And you did a great job. Thank you so much for coming on our show and sharing all these great stories with us. Are there any final thoughts you want to share before we go?
Yeah, I just one for anybody who's interested in part of the story I was sharing on my episodes with sleep paralysis and all that. If you go to Nocturnal Pictures YouTube channel, on there, so Nocturnal Pictures is the company that
it's your production company.
We made the last Rite with. It's my production company. There's like a little piece on there, about 10 minutes, where when we first started the project, I talk about in detail about what I saw in my episodes of my night terrors and stuff. So if people are interested, they can check out some of that.
I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, check it out. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't seen it yet. I didn't know. No, I'm going to go check it out after our show tonight. And that's on your YouTube channel, which is called Nocturnal Pictures?
Yeah, Nocturnal Pictures on YouTube. If you just type that in, you'll find it through that. And the other thing is like, I just leave everyone with is like, my ethos in my work works on the basis of light loses its relevance without darkness. We cannot have good without evil and evil without good.
Absolutely.
So what I want to do in the horror space is ultimately create something that's very memorable.
Absolutely. And you did that with The Last Rite, and I'm looking forward to the stuff you're going to create beyond The Last Rite, because you're a great director, you're a great writer, and I'm just really looking forward to seeing what else you're going to bring us in the years to come. Thank you so much, Leroy, for being our guest. Thank you to all our fans who tuned in for this incredible interview. Have a great weekend. Until next time, on behalf of Leroy Kincaide and myself, stay safe, and remember, always stay walking. Good night, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.